Hello, everybody. Hi, I'm Jody Schneider. I'm an editor at Bloomberg here in Hong Kong and president of the FCC, and it's my pleasure to introduce and host our speaker today. But first, a few announcements of upcoming events. On Wednesday, we have a luncheon, the Hong Kong protests, What Happened and What's Next. Unfortunately, it's sold out, so if you haven't RSVP'd, there is a waiting list. I think it's a little long, but check with the office if you're interested and you haven't RSVP'd, but it should be a really interesting event. We have on the 17th, we have quiz night, always a popular event. I'm going with a team called Chaotic Expats, so if you want to beat us, good luck. And then we have a vegan dinner on the 24th of July as well with a guest chef, Heinz Eggly. So I guess he's a well-known vegan chef, so please be there. It is now my pleasure to introduce our topic today, Ethics Issues in Gene Editing, with Dr. Derrick Au. He is the director of the CUHK Centre for Bioethics, the Chinese University of Hong Kong. And it's a really interesting, oops, I think I just ruined his slides, but he'll be able to fix them. It's a really timely topic. Scientific advances in molecular biology over the past 50 years have led to remarkable medical progress. Some of these have also raised issues, for example, gene editing. As we all recall, the world's first gene-edited babies created by a Chinese scientist have provoked debate and concerns about bioethics. Dr. Au is going to deal with some of those issues today, and there'll be plenty of time for questions afterwards as well. Dr. Au has served in the public healthcare system for more than 3 decades. He's been the Director of Quality and Safety before his retirement from the Hospital Authority. He's been focused in areas of clinical ethics and bioethics. Since joining CUHK Centre for Bioethics, he sought to improve public understanding of bioethical issues, as well as developing research projects and engaging in dialogue with organizations around the world. I bring you Dr. Au.
Just thank you very much. This is a really great honor. I'm just going to try and get back to the first page. With what is going on in Hong Kong in the past few months, I think this case looks like ancient history now. But it's actually only in last November. It's in the last week of November 2018 when the news broke out in Hong Kong. The venue was in the Hong Kong University, and many people thought that it was an event of Hong Kong University, but no, it's not. It's an international human genome editing summit held in Hong Kong, but the venue was in Hong Kong U. So I'm going to assume with this audience that you have heard the story of the gene editing of the twin babies being delivered. The baby had one of the genes deleted or attempted to be deleted, the CCR5 gene. The researcher, He Jiankui, claimed that in one baby he successfully deleted the whole gene. In the other baby, the other twin baby, maybe half. So the baby was neither here nor there. So I'm going to assume that you have knowledge of the background story. I'm going to in the interest of time, I'm also going to pretty much skip the scientific part of it, why scientifically it is a sort of flawed kind of research focus. But I'm happy to answer questions if you're interested in the scientific aspect of it. Why scientifically it is not even a good idea, besides ethics and responsibility. So this was November 29th, I think. He appeared on day 2 of the summit. He came out with a really nice looking briefcase. I really love that briefcase. Old-fashioned, old school, looks like someone who's really serious about scholarly work. He has a professional PR team behind him. So perhaps this is also part of the plan, because you don't always see people coming into stage with a briefcase like that. A few days before the summit, the news is already out. It was first reported by the MIT Technology Review, and then he correspondingly prepared videos, put on video clips in English, put on internet to speak for his case. And also he receiving the news, and he was quite prepared. People at the time, on the first day of the summit, people were not sure whether he will appear on the second day, but he appeared. Okay, so he came on board. There were really many good feature articles written since on the subject, and this is one piece that I really like, because the last sentence here really captured the mood of the event, that he had 59 slides through by in 20 minutes, and leaving scientists and the general audience desperately taking iPhone pictures for later scrutiny. Okay, this is really just exactly what the scene looked like, and this was how it looked like. Everyone was using the iPhone, and if you look closely on the third row somewhere, I was there using my iPhone as well. I think I was here somewhere. I don't have a mouse, but you can find me in the third row. So everybody was taking iPhones videos on the shot, so it was like an event like that. On the front, there's also Father Tham, Tham. He is the bioethics advisor of the Vatican. He's originally from Hong Kong. So I know him, and in the tea break we had some discussions of what it really means, what he did, what he claimed, what does it really mean, and what are the issues. So we had some interesting discussions there. This was in day 2, remember. And he was put on the spot, asked by the moderator and also a really top-notch scientist on some of the pointed scientific questions. This is mostly focused on the science of it. Why are you doing this research to prevent HIV? Is it a good idea? Is it ready? Is technology ready? What have you done in terms of consent? How are you going to protect the subject in future, and so on? So all pretty much the textbook scientific research questions was posed to him. I later heard from other sources, this is not in the news, that I was wondering why he was invited in the first place, because he is not a really top-notch scientist in the world, and this is a top-notch summit. It's really the best of the best in the whole world talking about genome editing. So I later heard from other channels that the decision was actually made something like maybe 2 or 3 weeks before the event, that people have heard that the babies have been born, okay, or are going to be born, or have been born actually. So they decided to invite him to perhaps to let the world see the issue in the context of scientific community, and also to have some people challenge his research. I think that was the general idea. So he came to the summit, and actually he presented his work not on human, on his work on mice and monkeys, gene editing on mice and monkeys, and claimed that he's having proof that it's quite safe in animals, as he had done it. But again, I looked back up on his other research registry in the National Child Registry. Actually, that research was done at the same time that the babies were already in the pregnancy. So he's doing in parallel animal studies to prove its safety, and also already doing human cases in parallel at the same time. So that was another dubious part of the research ethics, of course. So these are some of the questions that he got asked, and as I said, I'll be happy to answer questions related to this. But the idea of working on the CCR5 gene, if you're interested in doing a bit of wiki search, look for the Berlin patient, B-E-R-L-I-N, it's really in Berlin. Okay, so Berlin patient, that was from decades ago, and incidental finding in a gay patient with HIV infection under treatment, also had a leukemic condition, so had a bone marrow transplant. and it turned out that the donor had a mutation in CCL5 gene, and after the marrow transplant, the patient became free from HIV infections, or at least able to fight the HIV infection. So that was the waking of the whole question whether CCL5 gene has something to do with the ability of the HIV virus to enter the human cells, and whether we can use it to fight HIV infection. So the general idea is a so obvious idea. The question is whether is meaningful to do so preventive sort of gene editing to enhance the immunity against HIV. That was really the scientifically problematic question. So this was on day 1, before day 2, okay? Day 1, Professor Chu and Zhong is a sort of widely respected, widely recognized to be the grandfather of bioethics in mainland China. He's really conversant in English, fluent English, really into international perspectives. And I think he's also been just granted a fellow, really respected fellow to be a fellow of the Hastings Centre in New York. So he's really internationally recognized. So he was on day 1, and he had a sort of innocuous, benign speech on the research ethics scene in mainland China. But there he was on stage like I'm now, and he said, I'm going to spend 5 minutes to talk about this case because the case was already in the news. And he basically used 5 minutes to sort of condemn the things wholeheartedly and sort of kill the whole justification for the whole research, and basically said that he violated everything in mainland China and he does not represent mainland China and so on. So on day 2, of course, then He came on stage in a defensive position. He was preempted by He. These things does not happen ad hoc or spontaneously, right? If Professor Chu decided to sort of hit the nail hard on the first day, I think the line has already been taken or decided in the mainland on the government's position on the subject. So I think by day 2, I think He knew that he was in trouble. So then, of course, quickly you have read this, the 120 major scientists condemning this as being crazy and unethical. That's the point that I'll come back to in a minute. Sorry. But 2 weeks before the summit, I was in Shanghai attending the National Bioethics Committee, National Bioethics meeting as a speaker. And I was there in the front row taking a picture, and I see Professor Chu is in the center. Many who's who in mainland China bioethics were there. And interestingly, he's not a doctor. He's not a medical doctor. He Jiankui was also a speaker in this conference. So I actually got to know him, shake hands with him, and chatted. I was going to invite him to CUHK for a talk, a year later. He looked like a credible, composed, intelligent technology, not actually a scientist, technology, innovation kind of person who is quite able to talk in terms of international ethics and standards and regulation issues. And in that National Bioethics Conference, there's actually a special panel session talking about this. Will the chaos of gene editing take place like 10 years ago, like what happens with stem cell therapy in mainland China? So this is one clue that is not something that happened in isolation. People in the mainland knew that some problem may arise in this field. So they had, this is a really good session, sort of a debate session with pros and cons. And I was allowed to sit in the middle to watch them debate. And He Jiankui was on on one of the side debating the issues. So that was when he first impressed me as quite a good speaker. Something that tipped me off that this is not perhaps an individual problem. The technology part of it, we all have heard about the CRISPR-Cas9 the technology. This is not the only means to do genome editing. There are other platforms and tools. But this technology, when it became invented, it was jointly invented by someone in Berkeley and another company group in 2013, and soon became really the most popular means of doing genome editing because one is efficient. It's really quite efficient. It's probably 80-85% efficient. It's quite handy. It's light. The technology kit is very simple. Using it is simple as well. So now you then have a technology which is usually cumbersome, difficult, now can be simply utilized. In some interviews that I received, I draw an analogy saying it's like doing programming with programming language to move on to develop apps. Now you have apps which are equally friendly and powerful, and you can use it quite freely. So that was how CRISPR-Cas9 really became the lead in the field. And the technology is not only used in human genome editing. This is on monkeys, and it came out after the He Jiankui case. Chinese scientists were celebrating doing genome editing. They took out the gene regulating the sleep cycle. So these monkeys were born unable to sleep all their life long. And then of course when you can't sleep lifelong, you get depression. I don't know whether it's depression in the human sense, but you get mentally ill monkeys. So they were saying that they are working to develop a genetically uniform model for mental illness research. Okay, so controversial research, the point I'm making, controversial research using CRISPR is not limited to human. Okay, and then later on in just a couple of months ago, this came to news. There's another group, a more serious scientific group, who use gene editing to insert human gene controlling brain development into monkeys. So now you have human genes in the monkey brains. Because by now we know from evolution where the human and the apes depart, in the evolution, which genes have changed along the line. So now you can find a critical gene to put into the monkey to see if the monkey becomes human-like in some way. So this was done, and they claim that they were able to prove that the monkey became smarter in some way in some of the formal testing, and they're going to work further on the subject area. So the field is really wide open. It's not something that's just tend to do with a couple of babies. The day of the summit, the evening of the summit meeting after He Jiankui's book, I was in reading a book club. I was in reading a friend's book club, and I ran into a young MPhil student. She was in Chinese literature, and then she was in philosophy as MPhil master, and she was really inquisitive. And she sort of turned the book club occasion. We were doing Never Let Me Go. The book Never Let Me Go, talking about cloning people to be organ donation fields. So we're talking about the book, but she was putting all these curious questions about this case to me, and we had a chat over dinner. And I find that her questions were so interesting that I invited her to co-write this article for a regular column that our center write for the Hong Kong Economic Journal. And this article is about what should we be asking. Okay, so because at the time some of at least the Chinese media reporters came to me, they were not sure what actually was wrong with the design of the study. Why was it a bad idea? Was he just being ahead of others, like the test tube babies in 1978, Louis Brown? Was he just being a bit bold, or is it something more fundamental? So this is an article attempting to help the public to understand the questions, not the answers. And then, of course, in January this year, we read that the Special Investigation Team in Guangdong, commissioned by the State Department to investigate the issue, released tentatively the early findings and basically framed the whole thing as a criminal case. Okay, he is in personal frame, and he had forged fake ethical review certificate, so he didn't actually get the proper approval to do experiment. And the carriers in China, HIV carriers are not allowed to have IVF, assisted reproduction. Okay, they're forbidden to have assisted reproduction. So this is against that rule. And also, but in order to get the hospital to work with him, he swapped some blood samples so that the hospital supposedly didn't know that it's HIV subject that they're working with. We don't know how much of this is the full picture. Okay, this is the official release of the sort of the postmortem of the case. So trying to frame it as a criminal case. And of course, in the whole world, including Nature and lots of the media, they call him a rogue scientist. I had to read the dictionary again to make sure I understand the term rogue correctly, because I didn't think that it's a case of rogue scientist. I was invited to in the Academy of Medicine and a joint conference with UCHK Chicago in March this year, and my self-chosen topic is to explain from reproductive cloning and germline editing why rogue scientist is not the key issue. Okay, he may be a rogue scientist, he may well be a rogue scientist, but the issue is not about one or two rogue scientists. Okay, so that is my general thinking about the case. Okay, the Guangdong team released the report and the findings. So I have sampled a couple of expert reactions from UK because there are 4 reactions, and this pretty much gives you a feel for how people react to the case from their own stand. Okay, so the first response from Lydia Tabo is a concern that we should look forward. This should not trigger a wholesale rejection of the technology as a basis of clinical tools. So the worry, first and foremost, is that this will kill the whole line of research area, which is legitimate because she elaborated that it's different. It's one thing to edit the germline, which affects generations to come, versus doing genome editing, gene editing on organ tissues, like the heart. You can do editing of cardiomyopathy, hereditary cardiomyopathy muscles, and then implant on the patients to work on the heart. That won't pass to future generations. So there's a need to separate out at least what we call somatic editing versus germline editing. Okay, so it's a valid distinction. But I think it's interesting that the main concern has to do with protecting the science rather than talking about ethics. Julian Savulescu is with Oxford. He's one of the well-known, popular ethicists in the world, and in the field he's known as a utilitarian kind of philosophy. So he considers first and foremost the benefit and harm rather than the ontological principles. So his comment was that people should not look at it as just a regulation or compliance issues. It's first and foremost an ethical issues. Okay, that was his point. But I think the interesting thing is that subsequently he wrote on the issues later on, and his views sort of converged with the first expert that we shouldn't kill the whole field because it could do a lot of good. And he even said that even for enhancement kind of research, we should not kill the whole idea of enhancement of the human genome pool, because if there's some safe way to edit and improve the human genome for the future of mankind, why shouldn't we go ahead and do it? So here's a typical utilitarian kind of perspective. So even though his initial concern is that ethics is wrong in this case, his general position is still in favor of the line of research. The third reaction basically congratulate the mainland investigation and said this sets a really good example of legal and punitive sanctions. And you can get a sense, if you read between the lines, you get a sense that it's hoped that this will sort of close the case. The case has been investigated, he has been penalized, he will be put to prosecution for criminal offenses. So hopefully the case will close. Okay, this is one. But the opposite view is that the report does not really shed much light on the whole thing because it's not the whole story. You don't get to see the whole story. So there you can see when we talk about ethics and responsibility, it really depends a little bit on where you stand in the first place, how you frame the ethical concern or issues that will affect the discussion or analysis of position. So I decided to write another article on this case. The lady on top of the two photos is Karen Newhouse. She's a young scholar from He Jiankui Centre visiting CUHK by our invitation, and she was also in the summit as audience. So we chatted a little bit about the case, and she went home to the Hastings and wrote an article which basically argued that she is uncomfortable and disagree that the future of research in this field should be decided or determined by scientists through a consensus-making process, okay? Because the second summit, the general tone is that scientific community has to come up with an agreement on the boundaries and the principles. But her question is, why should it be just an issue of the scientific community? Because there's conflict of interest, there's sort of limited perspective, why it's not a public deliberation and so on. So that was her perspective. The second one is Professor He Jiankui. He's with U of Otago in New Zealand, and he wrote a really strong article published in the Hastings Brief saying that he does not think this is an individual case. His question is, why does it happen in China? Why does it happen to her? And He is a rising star in mainland China. He's one of the 1,000 talent pool in the national strategy to develop the next decade of innovative technology, biotechnology, and he's one of the weapons, the secret weapons of the country to get ahead of the rest of the world. So Professor He Jiankui's argument is that he is part of that national strategy, and he's also part of that national ambition. So he was playing a good soldier to forge the ground, to fight, to get ahead of others. So that was his position. And my article basically says I'm a bit more detached and removed from my opponent. I used the two cases to say that really I think the He Jiankui incidents left the world with two pieces of homework in 2019. One is for the scientific community, and the question is, what are you going to do about this kind of aberrant behaviors? And the other piece of homework is for mainland China, how you're going to reform the research, governance, and regulation to prevent things like this from happening again. So that was my basic thinking at the time. The prominent Chinese bioethicists responded. You see the name Professor Qiu Wenzhong again. I mentioned the grandfather of bioethics. Jia Xiaomei is his successor and now leading the National Bioethics Association as president in China. And Wei Ping Li is a really bright scholar working on ethics of biotechnology. So they wrote an article to the He Jiankui Centre, interestingly condemning the Guangdong investigation report as being inadequate. This is really interesting. This is like central government affiliated, no, not really affiliated, but someone in Beijing and the country leading bioethics saying that the Guangdong investigation is too narrow. It's not dealing with the bioethics issues, and packaging the whole thing as just criminal. And they said even if it were just criminal, why are you not exposing the whole conglomerate of people that are billions of dollars funding He Jiankui in his research in his companies, and saying, why are you not doing that? So that was meant to tell the world that the government and the ethicists in mainland China is really serious about this. So they don't think this is a closed case with the investigation. They also put the case, this is in response to Professor He Jiankui's comment of things happen in China, implying that China has a different set of values and different set of ethical standards than the rest of the world. So they were arguing that you can't say that it's a wild east. It's a term which is being used in some of the commentary field, because the same thing happens also in the wild west. You have cases like this happen in the Western world, and there are cases happening in the Western world. So they're trying to first defend the honor of the country, and also to argue that from bioethics point of view, the criminal investigation is not the whole picture. So I thought this was quite an interesting and thoughtfully written article. So 2 summits, right? The second summit was in Hong Kong. The first summit was in Washington, D.C. in 2015. And in the first summit, there was agreement and consensus on the boundaries and the guidelines. And there are 2 conditions which has to be met. One is that you have to have adequate evidence of safety and efficacy before you do human. Okay, that's the consensus in scientific. And second, we should not do human until there's broad societal consensus. Okay, so in 2015, there is 2 statements. One is scientific consensus, one is societal consensus. This is a reading by my colleague Alexandra Eller of our center, so I'm borrowing his slide. So in the second summit in Hong Kong, the statement after the whole saga of the thing came out, they confirmed that it's irresponsible to do human genome editing at this time. Yet they argue that we should have a pathway towards the future to work on the subject matter in a safe manner. And interestingly, in this statement, they no longer talk about societal consensus requirement. Okay, so then the requirement becomes a responsible pursuit of the subject matter in the scientific community. So my colleague was reading into the 2 statements, comparing it, and find that after this happened, you actually see a backtrack of the willingness to engage the public in the debate and deliberations, and so retreat to a scientific community, which I think is understandable. I think there's a sense that you at least have to have some consensus in-house to tell the world and lead the world in the discussions. And at the time, there was not a consensus in-house. So I can see where that came from, but you can also read it the other way, that it seems the scientific community is backtracking on public engagement. So what next? One group of scientists, including the advisor to Obama's council at the time, argued that we should have a worldwide moratorium, meaning that the whole world should stop doing research on human genome editing until a defined period of time, and then review. Right? This is the idea of a moratorium. But of course, the interesting thing is that after the first summit in 2015, the inventor of the gene CRISPR technique, Jennifer Doudna in Berkeley, already asked for a moratorium at the time. So she developed CRISPR. She knew how powerful it's going to be. And she knew that people would jump on board to use it to do whatever research they want to do. So she has called for a moratorium at the time. No one listened to her. So now in 2019, now she said, no, I don't think moratorium is the way to go, because it didn't seem to be really doing anything. If you do a moratorium, when do you stop the moratorium? How do you tell? If you don't do research, how do you know when it's going to be safe? So you practically it won't work. So the idea is that there should be a worldwide registry, perhaps led by the WHO, and then there should be some scientific consensus, a guideline to guide the future research. I think they are still scrambling for a really robust sort of ethical guideline on the issue, because it's a really complex issue of potential good on the one hand, and also the uncertainties. In February, the mainland China acknowledges that there's a regulatory gap and proceeded to move to tighten regulation, taking some of the power from the regulatory power from the Ministry of Science and Technology to move on to yet to be established body under the state and health stream of governance. And they're going to have a national registry of, if this goes forth, national registry of high-risk technologies, including germ editing, stem cells, and other genetic-related research. And they put it on to public consultation until March 27th. And then now I'm waiting for them to tell the world whether it's going to proceed or whether it's going to, to be revised. There are some objections to this approach because you use top-down regulation on new high technology is both difficult and sometimes problematic. So again, Professor Chiu and Jia Xiaomei's group wrote a second article, this time in Nature, and argued that there should be a reboot of ethical governance in China. So this is a continuity of what they were saying before, that the Guangdong investigation is not adequate. We should have a reboot of the whole system. But of course, I'm not sure what reboot means because everything is entrenched and institutionalized. So what exactly does reboot mean? And they elaborated to say that we should have government regulation, a central registry. They probably have heard the idea of the government to do a central registry, monitoring at a central level, informed by authorities in academia of science and academic medicine in China, and public education. Okay, the whole thing I think is nicely written. I think the first question anybody would likely ask is, do you really want the government to have such a huge role to do everything, to regulate everything about the new technology? And secondly, whether it will work. You have a list of things that are high risk, but there will be other things that pop up and happening in the field that would be outside your radar screen. So legal regulation means it's always behind technology innovation. So I think in some way I'm not sure this is the answer, even in the mainland context. So in summary, just my thoughts. I think that the issue is complex because we are really talking about ethics and responsibility at different levels. One is at the simple level of compliance and research ethics governance. We have institutional review boards. You have to comply with the SOP and also the law and things. So this one issue is, I think this is the simplest issue, the research integrity issue. The second issue is more thorny as a problem. That is, the technology is now so easy to use, it's democratized. You see the gene knockout kit, this is from a synthetic company in the States, and you can do mail order of the gene knockout kit, and then once of the kit, basically a equipped lab can do gene editing. So you can really, like Amazon, you can buy it online and then you can do it. And in fact, in He Jiankui's case, he was reported to actually got his genome editing kit from this particular company. The CEO has to come out and explain that no, we did not intend to let him do human genome editing. We have a sort of fine print sort of disclaimer that this should not be used on something. So proliferation of technology is another issue, which is in new biotechnology is really, I think, a huge issue. I think it's going to happen in AI as well. Today we won't talk about AI, but AI, the use application of AI in various fronts is going to be democratized. Thirdly, the question is, are there certain transformative technologies that are so powerful with such deep impact on society that should have a line circle around it and not venture into it? I'm thinking of like embryo cloning. You can embryo clone, and then you can also do gene editing and design babies, and and do eugenics. Do people really want to open the field? The other example is synthetic biology. You can now pretty much do synthetic organisms using gene editing tools to piece together the nucleotides, and it has already been done. Okay, the world already has a microorganism which is not happening in nature, and none of the DNA is happening in nature. So people are already doing it to synthesize. It's called synthetic biology. So do we really want to But then again, they argue that lots of good can come out of it and so on. So there are certain issues whether transformative technology should be especially on guard. Fourthly, I think it's obvious that ethical discussions is not keeping up the pace of technology. And lastly, the traditional IRBs are not coping with the technology field, because in technology you do not have the same vigorous institution review board research committee governance oversight as in academic institutions. So it's a complex issue, and I recently, just last month, I published a book on bioethics. This is not an advertisement. Well, it is advertisement. But I meant to say that some of the things that I talk about is in the book, including this particular case, and I hope to generate some discussions in the local community and also the local sensitivity to ethical issues. So here goes the presentation, and I welcome any comments and questions. I can take the questions from here.
We have time for some questions. If you could identify yourself and whatever organization you're with, if you have an affiliation, before you ask your question, we'd appreciate it. And there's some microphones that will come around, so if you want to raise your hand for questions. Well, there have to be some. Oh, okay, Emma will ask a question.
Just like the medical students that I've been teaching, no one raised their hands.
I'm Emma from AFP. You said that tighter regulations wouldn't be all that's needed. What else would stop a determined scientist from doing gene editing behind closed doors?
I'm not sure there's anything that would particularly stop all scientists from doing new things, because I think good scientists are always inquisitive and they will push the possibilities to the extreme. But I think really the issue perhaps is not so much the institutionalized scientific community, it's more the marginal scientist technology interface. I'm thinking, for instance, on human cloning. There's actually another world scientist in the States who claims that he has a lab in Middle East, and he recruits volunteers from Italy, Spain, and the rest of the world to do experimental preparation for cloning of human beings. And why would you do that? And he claimed that he has recruited a grieving mother who lost the baby girl, and the grieving mother would be happy to have another clone baby girl to replace the one who passed away. This is certainly not in the traditional scientific community, but I think it's this sort of things which is in the margin of the scientific community, which is always the issue. And I think the present trend or interest in innovative technology is fueling this sort of developments, because in technology you always want to be really have a talking point to sell things. I think it's this case in this case as well, because He is owner of I think 6 companies. I think SCMP has a piece reporting on his funding source and the companies that it's affiliated with, and one of the companies were on the verge of going to the stock market for to invite people, public investment. So if this became a success, that would really boom. I think it's this sort of interplay between venture capital, technology, and science, which is really a new kind of challenge for the traditional ethics regulation community.
Your questions?
Thank you, Richard Ward Associates. In a world where there's protracted debate about whether or not to vaccinate people, how does one pursue the recommendation of some of the committees that there needs to be a broad social buy-in before steps are taken forward? And how would you suggest that buy-in be assessed?
I skipped one slide prepared by my colleague Alexandra. He's a moral philosopher and also into political philosophy as well. So he, in a presentation in a CUHK seminar, he talked about this in some depth. And his thinking, I'm just quoting him now, is that you will never get full consensus in a society, but you can have useful deliberations or public debates to inform people and hear all the different views, and until such a time that you don't have valid and strong, extremely strong objections to something. That might be a minimum sort of consensus for things to move ahead. I think even this is theoretical. This is kind of consensus building is also theoretical. But there are people who are quite serious with it. The Hastings Centre is quite serious with public deliberations. And part of their energy as a Bioethics Centre is precisely to take the subjects which tends to be polarized in the community, to find platforms for people to voice and talk to each other in the middle ground, to find something to hopefully guide the scientific community. That approach some people call the critical frame approach. So you may not have full consensus to lead the way, but you have informed debate and deliberations to help the scientists to see their blind spots and also to think through the issues more thoughtfully from different angles. And I think this is one of the thinking of my center as well, that eventually I hope the center will be helping Hong Kong to be more informed and adequate in discussions of these issues.
Yeah, right here.
Yes.
Hi, it's David Kwan. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the scientific validity or lack of it of the experiment itself
Yes.
that you mentioned in the beginning of the talk? Thank you.
Yes. Broadly speaking, this is quite a bit simplistic, but broadly speaking, people divide the field into gene therapy for a non-serious diseases that has already manifested. Okay, that's gene therapy. And genetic enhancement, meaning that there's no disease yet. There may be a tendency to disease. And then you do something to enhance for the future. You can do enhancement even in non-medical context. You can enhance the muscle power to make the athlete to be explosive, in short sprints. And you can forcibly do editing to improve people's, vision or perhaps perfect pitch kind of tone for music. So there's two different domains. And generally speaking, the consensus is that one, if you're doing editing that lasts only in the generation of the patient, called somatic editing, working on somatic cells, and it's really treating a disease, then it's not controversial. Then there is actually consensus that people are working on it, on cardiomyopathy, on neuromuscular problems, and other genetic problems. This case is interesting because it's somewhere in between, or he packaged it as somewhere in between. He recruited cases that have father as HIV carrier, mother is HIV free, okay? So theoretically, the baby born reared in the family would have risk to exposure to HIV, okay? So he's saying that we should use the Berlin case CCR5 approach to delete out the gene and enhance the immunity of the baby so that the baby won't so easily get infected in the future. So it's prevention, okay? So do you call that medical or not medical? So it's in a sort of gray area. The weakness of this approach, the argument of the scientific aspect of it is on two fronts. One is that the Berlin patient actually did not have a total missing CCR5 gene. He has called delta 32, he has a deletion of 32 nucleotides within that gene, okay? As a result of that mutation, then he has some immunity against HIV. But his approach is to cut out the whole gene because you can't work so exactly on the delta 32 region. So just chop out the whole gene. but you don't know what the gene normally is for in the human body. Genes are very complex. You don't know what removing a whole gene means for the future of the baby. I think that's the most worrisome part of it. A professor in biochemistry and genetics was on a talk show, the Back Chat on radio. I was there, and she made the point that genes do not work just in one system in the body. So CCL5 genes in the immunology system may have this effect, but you don't know what its effect is on, for instance, on the brain, on the rest of the body. So you take out the whole gene, you don't know what is happening. The second argument comes from HIV specialists in Hong Kong and the rest of the world, and that is actually if the father is a carrier or a HIV patient, the mother is free, and you can simply do sperm washing from the sperm of the father, pre-washing and then IVF, and then you can pretty much guarantee that the baby will be safe and free from HIV when the baby was born. And there's also some possibility of prophylaxis around the time of delivery and so on. So the simple science is already there to prevent babies being born with HIV. Okay, so what are you trying to achieve in this case if the simple means is already there? And the argument also goes that you claim that it will give her lifelong protection, not just at birth, lifelong protection. But how are you going to prove that? You will not try to infect the young girl in future with HIV, so how are you going to tell that she's being protected by what you have done, or whether she just happened to be any one of the non-HIV population in China? So scientifically, it's really problematic. In research, my first reaction to the case was not so much to do with the scientific part. It has more to do with my general concern that he is using money incentive to recruit subjects from a vulnerable population. He is using a middle person to recruit HIV parents to come forth to be his research subjects. And I think it's a really no-no in modern research. You don't take advantage or con vulnerable population like that into research. Plus, he also framed his research in the consent form as a sign we are going to do a research which would produce the equivalent of HIV vaccination to your child. That's very different from gene editing, right? Taking out the gene. So I think there's lots of things wrong with the case scientifically and also in the research.
We have time for one more quick question. Anyone has? Yeah, right here.
Hi, this is Samuel Mack from Madison. Dr. Au, what you just talked about is the bioethics within the scientific community. What do you see will be the debate with the greater consumer market, so to speak? There may be some general public willing to take the risk. They argue that they may have their I don't know how to put it, the consumer rights to take the risk. What is your point of view of that?
Yes, this is one of the subjects that I intend to take up in the center in the coming few years in a different context. The idea is that modern technology is now so readily developed and so attractive in some way that direct-to-consumer services can more or less bypass the traditional communities or professions. What I'm thinking is whole genome sequencing for service for prospective parents or present parents. You can do the whole genome sequencing of the child. Now there are a few companies in Hong Kong doing that, selling whole genome sequencing service to parents so that you can do sort of perfect parenting on your kid. Because now you know all the genes, I tell you the profiles of the strengths and weaknesses, less SWOT analysis of your child's genetic pool and how you can best parent your babies. And they're selling also for other cosmetic purposes. You can whole genome sequence your gene, and then I tell you the best dietary and other advices so your skin can be, really beautiful and things. So you can imagine technology can be used for quite trivial, consumer-driven ways, and it can be aggressively marketed. I'm not saying that the public do not have the right to get access directly to new technology. The question is whether the public can be basically informed what it means to getting the kind of services or the provisions. On the whole genome editing and direct-to-consumer, I've written a piece of article again in the same column, and it got picked up by a Mingpo reporter who then did investigative journalism on the subject and became a front page feature on Mingpo, and that attracted the government's attention. And then the government in a committee was asking, is a whole circle, asking my view, among others, of what we think of the direct-to-consumer services. So I think the answer to that is you want the consumers to be informed like any other services, and particularly on the new and high-risk technologies.
Well, we'd like to thank Dr. Au for this presentation, and thank you for your questions. And we have a little gift for